You're standing in the middle of a forest so thick, sunlight barely touches the ground. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and ancient trees, and as you push aside a tangle of vines, your fingers brush against something unexpected: smooth, worn stone beneath the moss. It's not just a random rock, it's part of something far bigger, a path, but not just any path. This is a ghost road, a forgotten artery of commerce and connection that once pulsed with life, linking distant cities and cultures. Now it's silent, reclaimed by nature, yet its influence lingers in ways you'd never guess. These abandoned trade routes are more than just relics of the past. They're invisible hands still shaping our world today, dictating borders, influencing economies, and even defining cultural identities centuries after the last merchant caravan passed through. Think about the maps we use every day, the clean lines dividing countries, the neat labels marking territories, but those borders weren't drawn at random. Many follow the faint, ghostly outlines of routes that vanished long ago. The Silk Road, the Amber Route, the Incense Trails. These were the superhighways of their time, carrying not just goods but ideas, languages, and traditions across continents. When they faded, their footprints remained, etched into the land like invisible ink. Empires rose and fell, wars redrew boundaries, but the ghost roads never truly disappeared. They became the silent scaffolding of modern geopolitics, hidden in plain sight. So how does a path that hasn't been used in 500 years still dictate where a border falls today? Why do some rivers, mountains, and valleys' natural features that once guided traders now separate nations? The answers lie in the stubborn persistence of memory, both human and geographic. These routes carved deep grooves into the world, not just in the soil but in the patterns of power and connection that followed. In this video, we'll trace those grooves, uncovering how the ghost roads of history whisper to the present. From the shadow of a crumbling caravanserai to the modern customs office built on the same spot, we'll reveal how the past never really leaves us, it just takes on new forms. Get ready to step onto roads that time forgot and discover how they're still guiding us even now. Take the ancient Roman roads, for example, those meticulously engineered highways that once stretched from Britain to North Africa. Today, many lie buried under modern highways, their original stones crushed into dust beneath layers of asphalt. But look closer. The route of Italy's Autostrada del Sole, one of the country's busiest freeways, follows almost exactly the path of the old Via Flaminia, a road built more than 2,000 years ago. It's not a coincidence. Those ghost roads were so well placed, so perfectly aligned to geography and human need, that even when empires collapsed, the logic of their paths endured. Or consider the Grand Trunk Road in South Asia, a trade route dating back to the Mauryan Empire in the 3rd century before the Common Era. Stretching over 1,500 miles, it connected the Ganges River Valley to the ancient city of Taxila, weaving through mountains and plains. When the British Empire took control of the region centuries later, they didn't reinvent the wheel, they paved over that same route, adapting it for their own purposes. Today, sections of it remain vital highways, still tracing the ghostly imprint of a road that outlasted kingdoms, conquests, and centuries of change. But ghost roads don't just linger in pavement and borderlines, they haunt culture itself. Along the Swahili coast of East Africa, crumbling stone mosques and abandoned marketplaces mark the spots where Arab, Persian, and African traders once haggled over spices, gold, and ivory. Though the merchants are long gone, their influence lingers in the language. Swahili is peppered with loanwords from Arabic, Persian, and Portuguese, a living testament to those vanished exchanges. Even the food tells the story. Dishes like biryani and samosas didn't spring up in isolation. They traveled along ghost roads, carried by merchants and migrants, embedding themselves in local traditions until they became inseparable from the region's identity. The same phenomenon echoes in the American Southwest, where centuries-old Native American trade routes became the basis for Spanish colonial trails, which later evolved into segments of Route 66. The original footpaths, forged by the ancestral Pueblones to trade turquoise for parrot feathers from Mesoamerica, still whisper beneath the hum of modern traffic. It's a reminder that ghost roads aren't just physical, they're threads in a vast, interconnected tapestry of human movement stretching across time. What makes these routes so stubbornly persistent? Geography plays a role. A mountain pass or river ford that made sense for a medieval caravan still makes sense for a truck driver today. But there's something deeper at work. These paths became ingrained in collective memory, shaping where people settled, where armies marched, where governments drew lines on maps. A ghost road isn't just a forgotten trail, it's a blueprint, quietly guiding the hands of history long after the last traveler has passed through. Rivers don't just flow, they remember. For centuries, the Danube carved its way through the heart of Europe, its waters carrying salt, amber, and spices between bustling market towns. Today, that same river stitches together 10 different countries, serving as a natural border between nations like Hungary and Slovakia, or Serbia and Romania. But why here? Because trade routes don't just fade when the merchants pack up, they leave behind a kind of gravitational pull, drawing boundaries in their wake. Where goods once moved, armies later marched, and where armies marched, borders eventually hardened. The Danube's currents didn't just shape the land, they shaped the very idea of where one culture ended and another began. Mountain passes tell a similar story. Take the Khyber Pass, a narrow gap in the Hindu Kush that's been a crossroads for millennia. Persian emperors, Macedonian conquerors, and Mughal rulers all funneled their armies and caravans through this same rocky throat. It wasn't just geography that made it vital, it was the accumulated weight of history. When the British and Afghans drew modern borders in the 19th century, they didn't ignore that legacy. Today, the pass still marks the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan, a living testament to how trade routes crystallize into political lines. Valleys, too, hold onto their old roles. The Po River Valley in northern Italy, once the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, later became a battleground for medieval city-states fighting over control of its fertile trade routes. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you'll find those same rivalries reflected in the borders between newly unified Italy's regions. The land remembers. Even now, disputes over water rights and transportation corridors in the valley echo negotiations that began when ox carts, not trucks, carried the valley's goods. But perhaps the most surprising examples are the borders that follow trails no one even walks anymore. In the American Southwest, the modern boundary between Arizona and New Mexico loosely traces an ancient indigenous trade route for turquoise and macaw feathers, a path that hadn't seen regular traffic for centuries when surveyors drew the line in the 1800s. The logic was buried but not lost. Those old trails marked the most efficient paths through harsh terrain, making them just as useful to bureaucrats as they'd been to traders. So the next time you look at a map, try squinting, see past the bold lines and country names. Hidden beneath them are the ghost roads, the river highways, the mountain corridors that whisper to cartographers long after the merchants vanished. Borders might seem fixed, but they're really just the latest chapter in a story written by footsteps, wagon wheels, and the relentless pull of geography. And that story isn't over yet. The Silk Road's influence stretches far beyond the dusty trails where camel caravans once plodded between oasis towns. Picture this, a web of routes, not just one path, fanning out across deserts and mountains, linking the markets of Chang'an in China to the bazaars of Constantinople. For centuries, this network was the world's lifeline, carrying silk, spices, and ideas across continents. But when ships began to dominate global trade, the Silk Road didn't just vanish, it left behind a hidden blueprint. Today, if you trace the borders of countries like Uzbekistan or Tajikistan, you're following the ghostly outlines of those ancient trade corridors. The roads may be gone, but their logic remains. Cities like Samarkand, once bustling way stations where merchants haggled under tiled domes, still thrive in the same spots, their very existence rooted in decisions made 1,000 years ago. What's even more remarkable is how the Silk Road shaped culture itself. Buddhism didn't spread to China by accident. It traveled along those routes, carried by monks and merchants. The same goes for papermaking, which migrated westward from China, revolutionizing the Islamic world and later Europe. Languages, too, bear the scars of those exchanges. Ever wondered why the word for sugar sounds similar in Persian, Arabic, and even English? It's because the commodity and the word hitched a ride on Silk Road caravans. Even foods tell the story. Noodles, which originated in China, became pasta in Italy after traversing the same networks. The Silk Road wasn't just moving goods, it was stitching together the very fabric of civilizations. Then there's the less tangible legacy, the way people saw the world. For the first time, East and West weren't just abstract ideas. They were places you could reach, cultures you could touch. The Persian scholar al-Biruni wrote detailed accounts of India after traveling Silk Road routes, while Marco Polo's tales of China ignited Europe's imagination. These connections didn't just fade when the caravan stopped, they lingered in art, science, and politics, the blue and white ceramics of the Ming dynasty. Those designs were inspired by Persian pottery traded along the route, the astronomical charts used by medieval navigators. They blended knowledge from Arab, Indian, and Greek sources, all transmitted through Silk Road hubs. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is the way the Silk Road redrew human geography. Take the Pamir Mountains, a rugged knot of peaks where Central Asia meets South Asia. For centuries, this was a crossroads with routes branching toward India, Persia, and China. Today, those same paths are geopolitical flashpoints, with borders intersecting in ways that still reflect old trade dynamics. The Wakhan Corridor, a slender strip of Afghanistan poking toward China, exists because 19th century empires used the Silk Road's logic to buffer their territories. Even modern infrastructure like the Belt and Road Initiative consciously echoes the ancient network, proving that some ideas are too powerful to stay buried. So the next time you sip tea, a drink that crisscrossed continents on Silk Road caravans, remember, you're tasting history, not the dry, dusty kind locked in textbooks, but the living sort still shaping borders, languages, and even what's on your plate. The Silk Road didn't just connect places, it fused them, leaving behind a world where the past is never really past, just waiting to be rediscovered. Beneath the cobblestones of Vienna and the bustling ports of Gdansk lies a hidden map, one traced not in ink, but in golden nuggets of fossilized resin. This was the Amber Route, a 2,000-mile artery linking the Baltic Sea's amber forests to the sun-drenched workshops of ancient Rome. Picture merchants trudging through dense European woodlands, their packs heavy with Baltic gold, while Roman aristocrats paid fortunes for amber beads to adorn their villas. But when the Roman Empire crumbled, the route didn't vanish. It seeped into the land like tree roots, quietly shaping everything from city skylines to modern trade agreements. Take the Vistula River, once the backbone of this network. Amber harvested near its mouth would float southward on rafts, passing through tribal territories that later became Poland's earliest towns. Today, those same settlements, places like Krakow and Wrocław, are major urban centers, their medieval market squares standing where amber traders once haggled. Even the highways tell the story. Sections of Poland's modern A4 motorway deliberately overlap with the amber route's ancient path, proving that efficiency transcends centuries. The same logic that guided ox carts still guides engineers. Why reinvent the wheel when geography has already drawn the perfect line? But the route's influence goes deeper than infrastructure. Notice how amber craftsmanship clusters along its old trajectory, from Lithuania's traditional workshops to Austria's museum-quality carvings. These aren't random pockets of skill, they're cultural echoes. When artisans in Salzburg inlay amber into clocks today, they're using techniques passed down from Roman-era craftsmen who settled near the route's Mediterranean terminus. Language, too, carries traces of this exchange. The Slavic word for amber, janta, likely stems from Phoenician traders' term for the material, a linguistic fossil preserved along the Ghost Road's path. Perhaps most striking are the invisible alliances. The EU's Baltic-Adriatic corridor, a modern trade initiative linking Gdansk to northern Italy, unconsciously retraces the amber route's arc. Countries along this axis still share stronger economic ties than their neighbors, as if the ancient flow of goods left behind a kind of social gravity. Even regional dishes hint at this legacy. Hungarian seasoning stews with amber like saffron, or Polish honey cakes glazed with Baltic amber-infused liquor. These aren't just recipes. They're edible archaeology, proof that trade routes don't just move goods, they need cultures together over millennia. The amber route's greatest lesson might be its quiet defiance of time. A Roman senator's amber ring and a tourist souvenir bought in Riga today share more than material. They're bookends on a story that never really ended. The road itself may be buried, but its pulse still beats in border treaties, holiday traditions, and the very shape of the continent. After all, ghosts don't vanish, they just change form. The Roman roads were more than just stones laid in straight lines. They were the veins of an empire, pumping soldiers, merchants, and ideas across 3 continents. Stretching over 250,000 miles at their peak, these engineering marvels didn't just connect cities, they created them. Take the Via Appia, the Queen of Roads, which sliced southeast from Rome to the port of Brindisi. Today, Italy's modern highway system shadows its path, and the towns that sprouted along its route 2,000 years ago, Benevento, Taranto, are still major urban centers. But the real magic lies in how these roads refused to fade into history. When the empire collapsed, the roads remained, stubbornly guiding the footsteps of medieval pilgrims, Renaissance traders, and even modern commuters. What made them so enduring? Precision. Roman engineers didn't just pave, they studied the land, choosing routes that balanced speed, safety, and efficiency. Mountain passes were carved where the slopes were gentlest, rivers crossed at the most stable fords. That's why, centuries later, when Napoleon's armies marched into Italy or modern highways were planned, planners often found the Roman path was still the best option. The A1 motorway, Italy's backbone, doesn't just resemble the ancient Via Cascia. It literally overlays it in stretches, the ghost of a road whispering beneath 18-wheelers. But the influence goes deeper than asphalt. Look at a map of Europe's wine regions: Bordeaux, Burgundy, the Mosel Valley. Notice how they cluster near old Roman roads. That's no accident. Vineyards flourished where legions established supply depots, and the roads ensured their wines could reach distant markets. Even today, the rhythm of harvest festivals and trade fairs in these areas echoes the cadence of Roman supply convoys. Language, too, bears the imprint. The French word for road, route, springs from the Latin rupture, meaning broken ground, a nod to the Roman practice of cutting through landscapes. Perhaps most strikingly, these roads redrew human geography. The border between France and Germany, it follows the Rhine, but the towns that became flashpoints, Strasbourg, Mainz, grew where Roman bridges and forts once stood. The Via Augusta, which ran from the Pyrenees to Cadiz, didn't just link Iberian cities, it dictated where medieval kingdoms would later clash and where modern Spanish provinces would eventually divide. In Britain, the Fosseway, a dead straight Roman road, later became a de facto boundary between Anglo-Saxon and Celtic territories, its stones silently marking a cultural frontier. Yet the real testament to these ghost roads isn't just in borders or highways, it's in the habits they ingrained. Roman mile markers evolved into modern highway signs. The postal stations where couriers swapped horses became medieval coaching inns, then today's truck stops, even our obsession with straight-line efficiency. That's a Roman inheritance. Their roads were arrows shot across landscapes, rejecting meandering paths in favor of ruthless geometry, a mindset that still shapes how we engineer everything from subway lines to fiber optic cables. So the next time you're stuck in traffic on a European freeway, look down. Beneath the screech of brakes and the rumble of engines, there's a quieter sound, the echo of hobnailed sandals on stone, a reminder that some roads never end, they just change surface. The Sahara isn't just a desert, it's a vast, open-air ledger of human ambition. Imagine a caravan of camels, hundreds strong, plodding through dunes under a blistering sun, their loads heavy with gold from the mines of Mali and slabs of salt so precious they were traded ounce for ounce with the precious metal. This was the Trans-Saharan trade, a network of routes that for over 1,000 years stitched together the Mediterranean world and sub-Saharan Africa. But when colonial powers redrew the map of Africa, they didn't start from scratch. They often traced the faint, sun-bleached outlines of these ancient trails. The border between modern-day Algeria and Mali, for instance, follows the same corridor where Tuareg guides once led caravans to the fabled city of Timbuktu. Timbuktu itself is a living monument to these ghost roads. Once the Oxford of the Sahara, its labyrinthine alleys still hold libraries filled with medieval manuscripts in Arabic and Songhai, proof of the scholarly exchange that flourished along these routes. The city's iconic Sankor Mosque, with its pyramidal minaret, wasn't just a place of worship, it was a crossroads where Islamic scholars from Cairo debated with mathematicians from Ghana and poets from Morocco. Today, though the caravans are gone, Timbuktu's cultural DNA still bears the imprint of those exchanges, from the intricate geometric patterns adorning its buildings to the melodic blend of Arabic and local languages in its music. But the Sahara's ghost roads did more than shape cities, they redrew spiritual landscapes. Islam didn't spread southward through conquest alone. It traveled on the lips of merchants and the pages of Qurans tucked into saddlebags. The Great Mosque of Janeh, with its towering mud brick spires, stands as a testament to this quiet revolution. Built in the 13th century along a key trade axis, its design merges Arab architectural principles with local Sahelian techniques, a physical metaphor for how faith adapted to new soil. Even now, the rhythm of daily life in towns like Agadez or Gao echoes the call to prayer that first arrived with camel caravans, a reminder that trade routes don't just move goods, they move souls. The Sahara's influence lingers in more subtle ways too. Take the word caravan. It comes from the Persian karwan, but entered European languages via North African traders. Or consider the ubiquitous use of kola nuts in West African ceremonies, a tradition that began when they were prized as stimulants on grueling desert crossings. Even the region's famed indigo-dyed fabrics, like Mali's Bogolanfini, owe their vibrant hues to dyes that once traveled north in exchange for glass beads from Venice. These aren't just artifacts, they're threads in a cultural tapestry woven by countless footsteps across the sand. Perhaps most strikingly, the Sahara's ghost roads still dictate movement today. Modern highways like the Aren one in Mauritania or the Tenere desert tracks in Niger often overlay ancient salt routes, their truck stops standing where oasis towns once hosted camel trains. The same winds that guided traders by the stars now guide satellite-navigated convoys, proving that some paths are written into the land itself. Even conflict in the Sahel follows these old lines. Rebel groups and armies clash over control of the same corridors that once brimmed with gold and salt, a stark reminder that geography's grip never loosens. So the next time you see a map of Africa's seemingly arbitrary borders, look closer. Those lines aren't random, they're echoes of choices made by merchants navigating dunes a millennium ago, of empires that rose and fell along ribbons of trade. The Sahara's ghost roads whisper that borders aren't drawn. They grow layer by layer, like the rings of a tree or the strata of a dune, each era building on the footprints of the last. The winds of change began to blow in the 15th century, not across deserts or mountain passes, but over open water. With the advent of sturdy, ocean-going ships and precise navigation tools, the world's economic arteries shifted dramatically from land to sea. Imagine the moment when the first Portuguese caravel rounded Africa's Cape of Good Hope, proving that spices and silks could reach Europe without traversing the perilous Silk Road. Suddenly, a single ship could carry the cargo of 100 camel caravans at a fraction of the cost and time. The impact was seismic. Ports like Lisbon, Amsterdam, and later Bombay exploded into wealth, while inland trading hubs once bustling crossroads like Samarkand or Palmyra found themselves stranded, like islands in a receding tide of commerce. But here's the twist: these ghost roads didn't just disappear. They left behind cities frozen in amber, their grandeur fading but their influence lingering. Take Aleppo in modern-day Syria. For centuries, its souks thrived as the western terminus of the Silk Road, where Venetian and Arab merchants haggled over goods from the east. When sea routes dominated, Aleppo's star dimmed, yet its architecture, its multicultural DNA, even the layout of its streets, still whisper of that golden age. The same pattern repeats in Mali's Timbuktu, where libraries filled with medieval manuscripts stand as quiet monuments to a time when knowledge flowed across the Sahara alongside gold and salt. These places didn't vanish, they became time capsules, their very stones holding the memory of lost connectivity. Meanwhile, coastal cities rewrote the rules of power. Venice, once a minor lagoon settlement, became a maritime empire by mastering the sea routes its rivals ignored. Its Gothic palaces and Byzantine mosaics weren't just art, they were financial statements, built with profits from controlling the spice trade. Further west, Antwerp's Stock Exchange, the first of its kind, emerged as a nerve center for Atlantic trade, while inland financial hubs like Bruges languished. The lesson was clear: water was the new highway, and those who commanded it commanded the world. Yet borders, unlike trade winds, are stubborn things. When the overland routes faded, the political lines they'd helped define often remained, frozen in place by treaties and tradition. The border between Iran and Afghanistan, for instance, still follows the contours of old caravan trails, even though the flow of goods shifted to coastal ports centuries ago. In Central Asia, the arbitrary seeming lines between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan trace the faint outlines of medieval trading territories, proving that geography's grip outlasts even economic revolutions. The most fascinating legacy, though, lies in cultural adaptation. Inland cities that couldn't compete with ports found new roles. Granada in Spain, once a Silk Road outlier, reinvented itself as a center of Moorish artistry. The Saharan town of Ghadames, its caravan trade dried up, became a UNESCO-protected jewel, its whitewashed alleys now drawing tourists instead of merchants. Even languages bear the scars of this shift. Swahili, once a trade lingua franca along East Africa's coast, absorbed Portuguese and Hindi words as maritime trade eclipsed overland routes, evolving into a living record of changing tide. So the next time you see a sleepy inland town with an oddly grand mosque or a warehouse district lined with crumbling merchant mansions, look closer. You're standing on a ghost road not just of trade but of time itself. The ships may have won, but the land remembers. Consider the jagged line separating Afghanistan from Pakistan, the Durand Line. Drawn in 1893 by a British diplomat, it wasn't just a random slash on a map. It followed the Khyber Pass, a narrow gap in the mountains that had been a trade lifeline for millennia. Persian emperors, Macedonian conquerors, and Mughal rulers all funneled their armies and caravans through this same rocky corridor. Fast forward to today, and that ancient logic still dictates modern conflict. The Taliban and Pakistani military clash over control of the pass, not just for its strategic value, but because it's embedded in the region's DNA as a vital artery, one that no colonial border could ever truly sever. This pattern repeats globally. In the Caucasus, the Lachin Corridor, a sliver of land linking Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh, wasn't just a Soviet-era creation. It traces a medieval trade route where Armenian merchants carried textiles and silver between Persia and the Black Sea. When war erupted in 2020, control of this corridor became the conflict's centerpiece, proving that old trade paths don't fade, they become fault lines. Even the language of the dispute echoes the past. Azerbaijan's blockade of the route mirrored the medieval taxes levied on caravans, just with tanks instead of toll collectors. Rivers tell a similar story. The Mekong, once the backbone of Southeast Asian trade, now sees China and downstream nations spar over dams that disrupt old fishing and transport routes. These aren't just engineering projects, they're altering rhythms established when Angkor Wat was a bustling hub. The same waters that floated Khmer Empire rice barges now fuel 21st century diplomatic showdowns, showing how ghost roads morph into geopolitical leverage. But perhaps the most telling examples are the borders that seem illogical until you overlay an ancient trade map, the zigzagging frontier between India and Bangladesh. It follows the course of 16th century salt routes, where local rulers taxed goods moving between the Ganges Delta and Himalayan kingdoms. Modern customs checkpoints now sit where elephant caravans once stopped to pay tribute, turning age-old commerce into contemporary nationalism. What these conflicts reveal is simple. Borders drawn on paper are temporary, but the pull of geography and memory is eternal. When we see fighting over a mountain pass or river today, we're witnessing the latest chapter in a story written by footsteps and wagon wheels. The ghost roads don't cause wars, but they sure give them a stage. Picture a bustling market square in a small town, where the air hums with the sounds of haggling merchants and clinking coins. For generations, this place thrived because it sat at the crossroads of a major trade route, a stopping point for caravans laden with silk, spices, or amber. Then one day the traffic stops, perhaps a new sea route opens or political shifts divert trade elsewhere. the merchants pack up, the inns stand empty, and the town's lifeblood drains away. This isn't just a historical footnote, it's a pattern that repeats wherever ghost roads fade, leaving economic scars that can last centuries. Take the once prosperous city of Palmyra in Syria's desert. 2,000 years ago, it was the jewel of the Silk Road, a glittering oasis where Roman and Persian traders exchanged goods under towering colonnades. But when maritime trade bypassed the overland routes, Palmyra's wealth evaporated. Today, its ruins stand as a stark reminder of how quickly prosperity can vanish when the flow of commerce shifts. The same story unfolded along the Amber Route, where towns like Kaliningrad, once a hub for Baltic trade, saw their fortunes dwindle as sea transport replaced overland cart networks. Yet decline isn't inevitable. Some towns reinvent their ghost roads as economic lifelines of a different kind. In Uzbekistan, the ancient Silk Road city of Bukhara has transformed its caravanserais into boutique hotels, its bazaars into artisan markets catering to tourists hungry for a taste of history. Visitors now walk the same flagstones where medieval merchants once trod. Spending modern currency on handmade carpets and miniature paintings, proof that old routes can find new life in the global tourism economy. The same strategy works in Europe, where Germany's romantic road lures travelers with its medieval villages and castle-studded landscapes, all strung along the skeleton of an old Roman trade path. The contrast between these outcomes hinges on adaptation. In Ethiopia, the salt caravans of the Danakil Depression still follow ancient trails, but now their loads are as likely to end up in trendy restaurants as in traditional markets. Meanwhile, in America's Rust Belt, towns like Wheeling, West Virginia, once vital stops on the national road, struggle to repurpose their historic inns and warehouses in a world where interstate highways bypass them entirely. The difference: places that could pivot from trade to tourism or from transport to tradition managed to survive. Those that couldn't became cautionary tales. But the most fascinating cases are the towns that turned isolation into identity. In Oman's Wahiba Sands, Bedouin communities once reliant on frankincense trade routes now welcome desert tourists, offering camel treks along the same dunes their ancestors crossed. The commodity changed, but the path remained. Similarly, Mongolia's former Silk Road outposts have capitalized on their remoteness, marketing themselves as the last unspoiled frontiers of nomadic culture. It's a poignant twist. The very abandonment that once spelled ruin now becomes their selling point. The lesson is clear: ghost roads don't just leave behind empty trails. They leave behind choices. Some communities fade with their routes, while others rewrite their destinies, proving that even the quietest paths can still lead somewhere new. Languages don't just communicate, they remember. Along the Swahili coast, the rhythmic cadence of market chatter tells a story centuries in the making. This isn't just a dialect, it's a living mosaic of Arabic, Persian, Portuguese, and Bantu, stitched together by the needle and thread of trade. Every time a Tanzanian fisherman shouts "sauk" for market or a Kenyan vendor calls out "chai" for tea, they're echoing the voices of Omani merchants and Gujarati sailors who once crowded these shores. The words outlasted the ships that carried them, woven so deeply into daily life that they feel indigenous, though their origins span oceans. But language is just the beginning. Step into the spice-scented alleyways of Zanzibar's Stone Town, where coral stone buildings boast ornately carved wooden doors, a fusion of Arab latticework and Indian floral motifs. These aren't mere decorations, they're cultural fingerprints left by traders who brought not just goods, but entire artistic traditions. The same synthesis pulses in the taarab music drifting from open windows, its melodies blending Egyptian lutes with African drums, a sonic heirloom from the days when D-house ships ruled the Indian Ocean. Cuisine, too, carries the flavor of these vanished highways. The coconut-infused curries of coastal Kenya, the samosas sold on Mombasa street corners, even the clove-studded oranges offered during weddings. These dishes are edible archaeology. Each bite traces back to recipes that migrated alongside caravans of cardamom and cinnamon, adapting to local tastes until they became inseparable from regional identity. The same phenomenon unfolds in the American Southwest, where Navajo fry bread, a staple born from forced reliance on government flour rations, now shares table space with Spanish-influenced pozole, creating a culinary dialogue that mirrors centuries of trade and conflict. Religions also traveled these ghost roads, often hitching rides on merchant ships. The spread of Islam along East Africa's coast wasn't spearheaded by armies, but by traders whose piety proved as portable as their wares. The Friday call to prayer in Lamu's mosque still follows the melodic style of Yemen's Hadramaut region, a vocal tradition preserved like amber. Similarly, Buddhism's journey from India to Southeast Asia unfolded not through conquest, but along the invisible rails of commerce, monks walking the same paths as spice merchants, their teachings taking root in kingdoms hungry for both sacred and material wealth. Festivals freeze these cultural exchanges in time. In Mali's Desert Festival, Tuareg nomads perform dances that mimic the sway of camel caravans, their indigo robes mirroring the dyes once traded for Saharan salt. Bulgaria's Rose Valley Harvest, where petal gatherers sing Ottoman-era work songs, preserves the rhythms of a perfume trade that once connected Damascus to Paris. Even children's games carry echoes. The intricate Mancala boards carved into the steps of Aksumite ruins likely arrived via Red Sea traders, their seeds clicking like ancient currency. The true magic lies in how these influences blur the line between foreign and local. When a Balinese dancer performs a Hindu epic written in Sanskrit, or a Mexican mariachi band strums a guitar descended from Andalusian lutes, they're not copying, they're continuing. Ghost roads didn't just transport culture, they transformed it, creating hybrid traditions so organic that their origins fade into the landscape. Like rivers that vanish underground only to resurface miles away, these currents of human connection never truly disappear, they just find new ways to flow. The ink drying on the Congress of Vienna's treaties in 1815 didn't just redraw Europe's political map, it etched ghost roads into international law. As diplomats haggled over territory in candlelit salons, they weren't inventing borders from scratch. They were tracing the faded paths of medieval salt caravans and Hanseatic trade networks. Take the new boundary between Prussia and Saxony, a line that followed the ancient Via Regia, a route where Bohemian glass and Flemish wool had changed hands for centuries. By making it a formal border, the Congress didn't just acknowledge history, it gave it legal teeth, ensuring that a road built for merchants would now divide nations. Half a world away, the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 performed the same alchemy in the Middle East. The straight lines famously drawn on maps with rulers weren't entirely arbitrary. They often intersected at nodes like Damascus and Aleppo, cities that had thrived as Silk Road hubs long before becoming modern capitals. When French and British diplomats partitioned the Ottoman Empire, they unwittingly cemented the economic logic of camel caravans into 20th century statehood. The border between Iraq and Jordan, for instance, clips the edge of what was once the King's Highway, a 3,000-year-old trade artery for frankincense and copper. What began as a practical path for Nabatean traders became an invisible line determining passport controls and oil pipelines. This pattern repeats in Africa's colonial borders, many of which shadow the ghost roads of Trans-Saharan trade. The modern frontier between Algeria and Mali aligns almost perfectly with the medieval Timbuktu-Sijilmassa route, where gold and salt once flowed. European powers didn't consult local leaders when drawing these lines, but they did consult geography, often relying on maps that marked old trade wells and caravan stops as reference points. The result, borders that looked arbitrary on paper but followed deeply grooved paths of human movement. Even more telling are the exceptions, places where borders deliberately cut across ghost roads to weaken historical connections. The division of Kurdistan between Turkey, Iraq, and Iran didn't just split ethnic groups. It severed age-old mountain trade routes used by Kurdish shepherds and Armenian merchants. Similarly, the partition of India in 1947 didn't just create two nations, it fractured the Grand Trunk Road, a commerce corridor older than the Taj Mahal, leaving customs posts where there had once been bustling caravanserais. The irony is that these borders, meant to bring order, often inherited the tensions of the routes they formalized. The Dur-and Line's placement along the Khyber Pass didn't just divide tribes, it turned a centuries-old trade bottleneck into a geopolitical flashpoint. The same mountain pass that once taxed Silk Road caravans now sees Taliban checkpoints demanding tribute of a different kind. Yet some borders have done the opposite, reviving ghost roads through bureaucracy. When the EU expanded eastward, its new external boundaries inadvertently highlighted ancient amber route corridors. Suddenly, Lithuanian and Polish towns that had languished for centuries found themselves on a modern trade frontier, their medieval market squares buzzing with customs brokers and logistics firms. The roads hadn't changed, just their paperwork. What emerges is a paradox. Borders can fossilize ghost roads or fracture them, but they can't erase them. Whether as lines of conflict or conduits of commerce, these paths endure, proving that when human hands draw boundaries, they're often just tracing the fingerprints history left behind. Mountains don't negotiate, rivers don't compromise. These natural giants have always set the unspoken rules for where humans can move, trade, and ultimately, where we draw lines between nations. Picture a caravan of merchants approaching a towering mountain range. Their options aren't endless. They'll seek the lowest pass, the gentlest slope, the path of least resistance. Centuries later, when diplomats sit down to carve up borders, they're often just formalizing what geography already decided. The Khyber Pass isn't a strategic choke point because some king decreed it. It's because the Hindu Kush Mountains left no better alternative. Rivers tell the same story. The Danube's winding course through Europe didn't just guide medieval traders, it became the natural divider between empires. Why? Because crossing a major river meant tolls, bridges, and military vulnerability. Over time, those logistical realities hardened into political facts. Even today, the river's bends define the borders of 10 countries, from Germany's Black Forest to Romania's Danube Delta. The water didn't change, just the flags on either side. Deserts play by different but equally stubborn rules. The Sahara's vast emptiness didn't stop trade, it dictated it. Caravans moved from oasis to oasis because the alternative was death. Those watering holes, Timbuktu, Ghadaims, Agadez, became the pins on a sprawling desert map, their locations fixed by nature's scarcity. When colonial powers later drew borders across North Africa, many followed these ancient waypoints, turning survival routes into national frontiers. But here's what's fascinating. Even when technology seems to defeat geography, the old logic lingers. The Gotthard Tunnel, a 17-mile engineering marvel beneath the Swiss Alps, doesn't ignore the mountains. It acknowledges their power by burrowing beneath the same pass used by Roman mule trains. Modern trucks rolling through its depths are just the latest travelers in a chain that stretches back to Bronze Age traders. The lesson is humbling. We like to think borders are about treaties or wars or political will. But peel back the layers and you'll find the fingerprints of glaciers, erosion, and tectonic shifts. A river ford that made sense for a Phoenician merchant remains the best crossing point for a NATO supply convoy. A mountain pass that sheltered Silk Road caravans still offers the only viable path for a gas pipeline. Geography doesn't just suggest routes, it insists on them, whispering to every generation that tries to redraw the map. The ghost roads endure because nature always gets the last word. High in the Andes, where thin air turns every breath into a struggle, the stones still remember. The Inca didn't just build roads, they engineered a 25,000-mile nervous system for an empire that stretched from Colombia to Chile. These weren't simple dirt paths, but masterpieces of terracing and suspension bridges, clinging to mountainsides like veins across a giant's hand. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they marveled at roads that could outpace their horses until they dismantled them, trying to erase the empire's physical memory. But some things refuse to vanish. Today, if you drive Peru's Carretera Central or Bolivia's Route 3, you're rolling on the bones of the Quhapac-Ñan, the Inca's royal road. The genius lay in the details. Inca engineers didn't fight the Andes, they listened to them. Switchbacks followed natural contours, stone staircases notched into cliffs where slopes were too steep, and drainage channels cut beneath flagstones to prevent erosion. Modern highway planners face the same challenges, often arriving at the same solutions. The stretch of Peru's Highway 28, near Cusco, doesn't just parallel an Inca road, it is the Inca road with asphalt laid directly over original stonework. Even the tunnels piercing Andean peaks often align with ancient corridors, proving that 500 years of technology haven't improved on the Inca's grasp of geography. But the road's true legacy isn't just in pavement, it's in the living culture they sustain. Quechua-speaking traders still hike segments of the Quhapac-Ñan to reach remote markets, their llamas treading the same stones as their ancestors. In Bolivia, the pre-colonial road linking Tiwanaku to the coast now serves as a pilgrimage route for Aymara communities, blending Catholic feast days with rituals older than the Spanish language itself. Even tourism leans into this continuity. The iconic Inca Trail to Machu Picchu isn't some rediscovered relic, it's a segment of the original network. Its daily hiker quotes a modern echo of the messengers who once sprinted its length with quippers knotted with imperial messages. The most startling survival, though, lies in governance. The Inca used their roads to administer a vast empire without wheels or writing, relying on relay runners to carry census data and decrees. Today, Peru's government has revived that logic in the digital age. Fiber optic cables now snake along ancient rights-of-way, bringing internet to villages where the Inca once stationed chasquis, their legendary couriers. The medium changed, but the infrastructure's purpose didn't, connecting people across impossible terrain. Perhaps the ultimate testament to these ghost roads is how they defy categorization. In Ecuador, segments of the Quhapac-Ñan have been absorbed into national parks, protected not just as history, but as ecological corridors where spectacled bears and pumas walk routes once patrolled by Inca soldiers. In Argentina, archaeologists recently found that a purported colonial trail near Salta was actually Inca, its stones hidden under centuries of dust, waiting to correct the record. Every rediscovery whispers the same truth. Empires fall, but their roads keep whispering to those who know how to listen. Consider the humble grain of salt today. It's so commonplace we barely give it a second thought, but 2,000 years ago, it was as valuable as gold. In ancient Rome, soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, giving us the word salary. And just as precious metals had their trade routes, salt had its own sacred pathways, none more famous than Italy's Via Salaria, the Salt Road. Stretching from the salt pans of Ostia to the heart of the Apennine Mountains, this route didn't just carry cargo, it built civilizations. The towns that sprouted along its path, places like Ascoli, Paisno, and Rieti, owed their prosperity to the steady flow of salt-laden carts. But when the salt trade faded, the road didn't vanish. It simply reinvented itself, becoming the backbone of medieval pilgrimages and, eventually, Italy's modern highway system. The Via Salaria's evolution is a masterclass in adaptation. Salt was essential for preserving food, curing leather, and even religious rituals, making its transport a matter of survival. Roman engineers paved the route with flat stones, wide enough for 2 ox carts to pass, a design so practical that medieval travelers reused it for centuries. By the Middle Ages, the salt caravans had dwindled, but the road found new purpose as a pilgrimage path to Rome. Monasteries and hospices sprang up along the way, offering shelter to weary travelers. Fast forward to the 20th century, and those same stretches were paved with asphalt, their ancient foundations still intact beneath the tires of speeding Fiats. The road never died, it just kept changing costumes. This pattern repeats across continents. In West Africa, the Trans-Saharan salt caravans from Timbuktu to Tagaza left behind trails that later became critical routes for the exchange of gold and slaves, and eventually modern highways linking Mali to Algeria. In France, the Route du Sel, once trodden by merchants hauling salt from the Atlantic to landlocked regions, now overlaps with sections of the A62 autoroute. Even in the Himalayas, the ancient salt trade routes between Tibet and Nepal have become vital corridors for tourism, with trekking trails following the same precarious paths where yak caravans once carried blocks of pink Himalayan salt. But the most fascinating transformations are cultural. Along Germany's old salt road, which connected Lüneburg's salt mines to the Baltic coast, the white gold's legacy lives on in unexpected ways. The town of Lüneburg, its wealth built on salt, boasts a Gothic town hall funded by salt taxes, now a UNESCO site. Local breweries still use salt-infused water from ancient wells, giving their beers a unique minerality. And every autumn, villages along the old route host salt-themed festivals, where costumed reenactors parade with mock salt barrels, keeping the memory alive long after the last trade cart rolled through. What these salt roads teach us is that trade routes aren't just about the goods they carry, they're about the human connections they foster. When the salt stopped moving, the roads didn't become relics, they became vessels for new stories. Pilgrims, soldiers, tourists, and truckers all followed in the footsteps of those first salt merchants, each adding another layer to the road's biography. The stones remember, the asphalt hums with echoes, and the next chapter is always being written. High in the mist-shrouded mountains between China's Yunnan province and the Tibetan plateau, a narrow trail clings to cliffsides where one misstep could send you tumbling into the abyss. This isn't just any path, it's the Tea Horse Road, a network of trails where for over 1,000 years, men and animals risked their lives to carry 2 precious commodities, tea leaves going west and war horses coming east. At its peak during the Tang Dynasty, this route saw caravans of up to 500 mules trudging single file through some of Earth's most treacherous terrain, their loads of compressed tea bricks destined for Tibetan monasteries and nomadic herders. The horses they brought back weren't just livestock, they were strategic assets, bred on the Tibetan highlands for their ability to withstand extreme cold and altitude, making them prized cavalry mounts for Chinese emperors. What makes this ghost road extraordinary isn't just its history, but how stubbornly it clings to relevance. Though the last official tea caravan plodded through in the 1940s, the route's imprint lingers in everything from modern trucking routes to the morning rituals of Tibetan monks. Take China National Highway 214. Its winding path through the Hengduan Mountains isn't an engineer's whim. It follows precisely the same corridors where tea porters once balanced 100-pound loads on bamboo backframes, their routes dictated by mountain passes and river fords that haven't moved in millennia. Even the roadside tea houses dotting the highway today often stand where caravan rest stops once provided shelter, their menus still featuring yak butter tea, the very drink that fueled the original trade. The cultural echoes run deeper. In Lijiang's ancient town, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the cobblestone streets worn smooth by mule hooves now host tourists rather than traders. But the wooden storefronts still sell tea compressed into discs using methods unchanged since the Song dynasty, and the local Naxi people's Dongba script once used to record tea contracts now decorates souvenir postcards. Meanwhile, in Tibetan monasteries, tea bricks from Yunnan remain part of religious ceremonies, their arrival still timed to follow the old trading seasons. The commodity hasn't changed, only the delivery method has, with trucks replacing mule trains on the same schedule their ancestors followed. Perhaps most strikingly, the tea horse road's legacy lives on in the region's delicate geopolitics. The same routes that carried tea and horses now facilitate China's Belt and Road Initiative, with new roads and rail lines consciously retracing the ancient network. When Chinese and Tibetan merchants meet at modern border markets like Shangri-La's Dukizong, they're recreating exchanges that began 12 centuries ago. Only now the goods might include smartphones alongside traditional goods. Even tensions over the region's autonomy play out along these old corridors, with checkpoints and infrastructure projects positioned at what were once key trading posts, proving that ghost roads don't just carry goods, they carry power. The next time you sip a cup of pu'er tea, consider this. The leaves in your cup may have traveled routes older than the Great Wall, following geographic logic so perfect that even in our age of satellites and superhighways, we still can't improve upon it. The mules are gone, but the mountains remember. The sun rises over a desert caravan stop that hasn't seen a silk merchant in 500 years, but the voices aren't gone. Instead of haggling over bolts of fabric, today's travelers clutch guidebooks, tracing their fingers along faded frescoes as local guides recount tales of Marco Polo's stopovers. This is the new life of ghost roads, not forgotten but reborn as living museums. Across the globe, ancient trade routes are experiencing a renaissance, not as arteries of commerce but as pathways for curiosity. The Silk Road, once a network of dust-choked trails, now lures hikers to Uzbekistan's Registan Square and boutique travelers to Xi'an's night markets, where the clatter of souvenir tea tins echoes the clinking of medieval coin purses. Spain's Camino de Santiago offers perhaps the most striking transformation. What began as a medieval pilgrimage route for penitents trudging toward the Apostle James Shrine has morphed into a cultural phenomenon. Modern walkers, some spiritual seekers, others adventure tourists, follow the same scallop shell markers that guided medieval feet, but now they document their journeys on social media, sleep in renovated monasteries turned hostels, and fuel a cottage industry of credential stamps and artisanal leather backpack tags. The route hasn't changed, its pilgrims have. Local economies, once reliant on selling bread and wine to weary travelers, now thrive on renting e-bikes and selling hand-painted ceramics to Instagram-savvy globetrotters. The genius of these revived routes lies in their layered storytelling. In Turkey, the Sultan's Trail, a 15th-century Ottoman trade and military corridor, now invites hikers to traverse forests where janissaries once marched, pausing at village cafes where elders share oral histories over cups of apple tea. Meanwhile, Morocco's old salt caravan routes through the Atlas Mountains have become multi-day trekking adventures, complete with glamping tents pitched where camel drivers once rested. Tourists don't just walk these paths, they absorb them, tasting dishes like tagine cooked over fires just as caravan cooks prepared them centuries ago, their spices carried along the same trails. But the impact goes deeper than economics. In Georgia, the revitalized Silk Road segment through the Caucasus has become a tool for cultural preservation. Villages like Ushkuli, once fading as younger generations migrated to cities, now host walking tour groups eager to see medieval tower houses and hear polyphonic folk songs, an art form that might have vanished without tourism's incentive to keep traditions alive. Similarly, Bhutan's ancient trade routes to Tibet, once used for bartering rice and wool, now form the backbone of spiritual trekking itineraries, with fees funding monastery restorations and organic farming cooperatives. Not every revival is seamless. In some places, the tension between authenticity and accessibility simmers. China's reconstructed Silk Road-themed towns can feel more like movie sets than living history, while sections of Peru's Inca Trail now require permits to prevent overcrowding. Yet even these challenges spark dialogue about how to honor the past without freezing it in amber. The most successful projects like Jordan's Jordan Trail, which weaves Nabatean trade routes with Bedouin hospitality, prove ghost roads don't need to choose between past and present. They can be both, a palimpsest where ancient footsteps and modern boot prints coexist, each giving meaning to the other. What emerges is a quiet revolution in how we value these corridors. No longer just forgotten dirt tracks, they've become time machines, economic engines, and bridges between cultures. The next time you lace up your hiking boots to walk a historic trade route, remember, you're not just a tourist. You're part of an unbroken chain that began with merchants, pilgrims, and messengers, all following the same immutable logic of geography and human connection. The goods have changed, but the path remains, and sometimes that's enough. Beneath the flickering glow of a village storyteller's fire, the ghost roads breathe again, not in stone or dirt, but in whispers. Every culture that's ever relied on these vanished routes has spun tales to explain their silence. In the Carpathian Mountains, shepherds speak of the Karuta Ku Morti, the cart of the dead, a phantom wagon said to rumble down abandoned Roman roads at midnight, its wheels creaking with the weight of plague victims. The story isn't just a campfire scare, it's a folk memory of the Black Death, when real wagons carried corpses along those same paths and trade ground to a halt. Along Morocco's old salt routes, Tuareg guides warn travelers of jinn haunting empty caravanserais. These desert spirits aren't random bogeymen, they're echoes of very real dangers. The ruins where the jinn supposedly dwell were once bustling stops where merchants faced bandits, sandstorms, and dehydration. The legends preserve the trauma of those who didn't make it, turning historical peril into supernatural cautionary tales. Even the jinns described appearances tall, cloaked figures, mirror the robes of long-vanished Saharan traders, their forms blurred by heat and memory. Some ghost roads hide their stories in plain sight. England's Ridgeway, an ancient track older than Stonehenge, is dotted with coin trees, oaks, and ashes hammered full of bent pennies. Local lore claims they're offerings to fairy folk, but archaeologists recognize them as modern descendants of a far older tradition. Roman travelers driving livestock along the Ridgeway would nail coins to trees as votives to Mercury, god of trade and travel. The ritual faded, but the instinct to mark the path with currency never quite died. Then there are the treasure tales. From Anatolia to the Andes, every ghost road seems to have its buried hoard. The lost payroll of a vanished army, the gold-laden mule train swallowed by a landslide. In Sri Lanka, villagers near the ancient port of Mantai still scour the beaches after storms, searching for Arab coins washed ashore from shipwrecks. These aren't just fantasies, they're rooted in historical events. The treasure is often real, just not in the form storytellers imagine. The Roman denarii I found in Cambridgeshire fields aren't pirate loot, but dropped payments from merchants hurrying along the Eichnield Way. The most haunting narratives aren't about gold or ghosts, but about the roads themselves having awareness. In Japan, the yokai spirit Oshiroi Baba appears as an old woman scrubbing makeup off her face, always near crumbling sections of the Edo-era Nakasendo Highway. Her presence warns of neglected infrastructure, a folk embodiment of the road's literal cry for maintenance. Similarly, Navajo traditions speak of Atayaid, spirits who guide travelers back to the right path when they stray from old trading trails. These stories encode vital knowledge, which routes stay passable in flash floods, where to find water, how to navigate by stars. What's remarkable is how these oral maps persist. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal songlines, ancestral trade routes encoded in music still guide initiates through deserts where GPS fails. The melodies describe landmarks invisible to outsiders, a rock shaped like a gona, a dry creek that flows underground. When anthropologists compared these songs to 19th century explorer journals, they found near-perfect overlap, proof that the ghost roads never faded for those who knew how to listen. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson. Ghost roads don't vanish when the last cart passes. They live on in the grandmother's tale about the highwayman's oak, the child's game played on crumbling cobblestones, the festival where townspeople reenact medieval markets. These aren't just nostalgia, they're a refusal to let the past dissolve into silence. Every legend, every ritual, every coin pressed into bark is a stitch in time, mending the tear between then and now. The roads may be ghosts, but the stories, those are very much alive. A broken clay tablet lies half buried in the dirt, just one fragment among thousands at a dig site in Turkey. But when an archaeologist brushes away the dust, the cuneiform symbols reveal something extraordinary. A merchant's inventory, listing bolts of Babylonian linen and cedar resin from Lebanon. This isn't just ancient paperwork, it's a breadcrumb on a ghost road. Across the globe, archaeologists are piecing together these vanished trade networks, not from maps or legends, but from the physical debris left behind. A scattered trail of Roman coins in a Hungarian field marks where a branch of the Amber route once passed. A cache of Tang Dynasty porcelain shards in a Kenyan creek bed proves Silk Road merchants reached farther than historians ever imagined. Every excavation peels back another layer, revealing how deeply these forgotten paths shaped our world. Some finds rewrite history books entirely. Take the recently uncovered caravanserai in Uzbekistan's Kizilkum Desert, a sprawling ruin with stables for 300 camels and workshops for repairing wagon wheels. Its location, midway between Samarkand and the Aral Sea, confirms what scholars long suspected. The Silk Road had a major northern branch previously thought impassable due to harsh terrain. Nearby, archaeologists unearthed Sogdian trading contracts etched onto wooden slips, detailing taxes paid for safe passage. These aren't just artifacts, they're the receipts of globalization, proving that even 1,500 years ago, trade was a complex web of logistics and trust. Other discoveries come in smaller, more intimate forms. Along England's Eichnield Way, a prehistoric track later used by Romans metal detectorists keep finding tiny lead tokens stamped with Mercury's face. These pilgrim badges were medieval travelers' proof of safe passage, sold at roadside shrines, but chemical analysis revealed something startling. The lead came from German mines, meaning these humble tokens were themselves products of long-distance trade. Even the objects meant to facilitate movement along ghost roads had their own travel histories, creating a nested puzzle of human connection. The real magic happens when science breathes life into these fragments. In Jordan's Wadi Rum, archaeologists mapping Nabatean spice routes used satellite imagery to spot faint wheel ruts invisible from the ground, then matched them to camel skeletons found nearby with deformed spines from carrying heavy loads. In Mexico, soil samples from old Aztec trade paths still show elevated mercury levels from the cinnabar pigment that once spilled from merchant pouches. These roads didn't just vanish, they left forensic traces in the very earth. Perhaps most moving are the personal items lost along the way. A child's leather sandal preserved in Mongolia's permafrost, its toe curled from miles of walking. A bundle of love letters abandoned at a Silk Road post station, the ink smudged by what might have been tears. These aren't just relics, they're reminders that ghost roads were traveled by real people, merchants dreaming of home, parents carrying children, adventurers chasing horizons. Now, new technologies are uncovering even deeper layers. LiDAR scans in Cambodia's jungle revealed a vast network of raised causeways linking Angkor to distant quarries, while ground-penetrating radar in Italy's Po Valley detected the submerged foundations of Roman era inns spaced precisely one day's oxcart journey apart. Even AI gets in on the act, with algorithms analyzing pottery styles across continents to reconstruct trade flows our ancestors never thought to document. What emerges is humbling. These roads weren't just dirt tracks between cities, they were the internet of their age, transmitting goods, ideas, and DNA. A DNA study of skeletons along the Trans-Saharan route found sub-Saharan genes in medieval Moroccan graves and Berber ancestry in Malian burial sites, all carried on the tides of commerce. The artifacts whisper a truth louder than any history book. Borders are fleeting, but connections endure. Every time a trowel uncovers a Venetian bead in Alaska or a Chinese coin in Zimbabwe, it's proof that our world has always been far smaller and far more intertwined than we dare believe. The moment the first steamship belched smoke across the Atlantic, the world's economic arteries rerouted themselves almost overnight. Suddenly, a single vessel could carry the cargo of 100 camel caravans, slashing travel time from months to weeks. Ports like Liverpool and New York exploded into wealth, while inland trading hubs once thriving crossroads like Aleppo or Samarkand were left stranded, their caravanserais emptying like hourglasses running out of sand. But here's what's fascinating: the ghost roads didn't vanish, they adapted. The same mountain passes that guided medieval merchants now cradle railroad tracks, their gradients perfected over centuries of trial and error. The autobahns of Germany, many trace the precise curves of medieval salt routes, where engineers realized their ancestors had already plotted the most efficient path. Railroads became the great repurposers of ghost roads. India's Grand Trunk Road, a trade corridor older than the Taj Mahal, now shares its right-of-way with the Delhi-Kolkata railway line. Surveyors laying the tracks in the 1800s didn't start from scratch. They followed the ruts left by ox carts and elephant caravans, recognizing a route honed by 2,000 years of foot traffic. Similarly, the Trans-Siberian Railway didn't cut a new path through the taiga. It stitched together segments of the ancient tea road, where Siberian fur traders had long followed reindeer migration trails. Technology didn't erase these routes, it just gave them steel bones. Even in the age of jet travel, the old logic persists. Modern highways often cling to ghost roads like shadows. Italy's A1 motorway mirrors the Via Aurelia, a Roman coastal road built to outflank the Alps. Truckers barreling down America's Interstate 40 today are unwitting retracing the path of the National Old Trails Road, which itself followed Native American trade corridors. The reason is simple: geography doesn't change. A river ford that made sense for a covered wagon still makes sense for an 18-wheeler. A mountain pass that spared medieval merchants a treacherous climb still offers the gentlest slope for a modern highway. But the most unexpected rebirths happen in the digital realm. Fiber optic cables now snake along the same corridors that once carried silk and spice. The undersea cables linking Europe to Asia, many terminate at the same ports: Alexandria, Venice, Malacca, that flourished during the Age of Sail. Even satellite navigation pays homage to history. GPS coordinates for remote desert airstrips in the Sahara often align with medieval caravan stops, proving that some waypoints are too vital to abandon. The lesson is clear: technology doesn't kill ghost roads, it reincarnates them. Those crumbling cobblestones, they're not relics, they're the first draft of a blueprint we're still following. The past isn't just prologue, it's the operating system quietly running beneath our modern world. In Greenland's thawing tundra, a shape emerges from the retreating ice, not just rock, but the unmistakable outline of a path. This is no animal trail, it's a Viking trade route frozen in time since the Middle Ages. As climate change melts glaciers and dries up riverbeds, it's performing an unintended archaeological dig on a global scale, exhuming ghost roads we assumed were lost forever. In Norway's Jotunheim Mountains, receding snow has revealed passes used during the Roman Iron Age, littered with horseshoes and broken sledges. Mongolia's Gobi Desert, now expanding due to shifting rainfall patterns, is exposing segments of the Silk Road buried for centuries under sand dunes. These resurrected routes aren't just curiosities, they're rewriting history, proving trade networks stretched farther and earlier than we ever documented. But while some ghost roads reawaken, others face oblivion. Coastal trade hubs that thrived for millennia now grapple with rising seas. The ancient port of Lothal in India, a Harappan-era dockyard that connected Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley 4,000 years ago, risks submersion as storm surges intensify. Venice's marble piazzas, built on the wealth of medieval trade routes, now flood dozens of times a year, their foundations weakened by salt water. Even modern megacities like Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great as a linchpin of Mediterranean commerce, are sinking, their seawalls no match for accelerating sea level rise. The cruel irony: many of these cities became hubs precisely because their coastal locations offered easy access for ships. Now that same geography threatens to erase them. The geopolitical ripple effects are already unfolding. As Arctic ice retreats, it's unveiling not just Viking trails but entirely new shipping lanes. The fabled Northwest Passage, a graveyard for 19th century explorers, may soon become a bustling corridor, cutting weeks off voyages between Europe and Asia. Nations are scrambling to claim these thawing waterways, with Canada, Russia, and the U.S. quietly repositioning military assets near once frozen straits. Meanwhile, in Central Asia, the disappearance of glaciers means ancient mountain passes long blocked by ice are reopening, potentially reviving overland trade between China and Europe that hasn't been viable since the Little Ice Age. The ghost roads of the future might look less like camel trails and more like meltwater channels, yet the most profound changes could be in the global south. The Sahara's relentless expansion is swallowing villages along the old Trans-Saharan trade routes, forcing Tuareg salt caravans to detour hundreds of miles. At the same time, increased droughts are making some desert crossings impossible, stranding oasis towns that have hosted travelers since Roman times. Conversely, erratic rainfall in the Sahel is revealing previously hidden segments of ancient roads, their stone markers suddenly visible after centuries buried under dust. These shifts aren't just altering landscapes, they're redrawing the invisible maps of human connection, pushing communities to forge new paths even as old ones resurface. What emerges is a paradox. Climate change is both archaeologist and bulldozer, unearthing one set of ghost roads while paving others. The boundaries between past and future are blurring. A melting alpine glacier might expose a Roman trade route one summer, only for the resulting floodwaters to wipe out a medieval bridge downstream the next. In this unstable new world, the only certainty is that the routes we take and the borders we draw will never be as fixed as we once believed. The Earth is writing its own sequel to the story of ghost roads, and we're just beginning to read the chapters. Political borders might slice through maps with the crisp precision of a bureaucrat's pen, but culture laughs at straight lines. Take the Kurdish people, whose homeland straddles Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, a patchwork stitched together by colonial treaties that paid no heed to ancient trade corridors or tribal territories. Yet despite these divisions, a Kurdish grandmother in Diyarbakir still prepares the same spiced lamb stew as her cousin in Erbil, rolling out dough for sembusek pastries just as their ancestors did when caravans crisscrossed the Zagros Mountains. The recipe, like the language and the music, refuses to acknowledge the checkpoints and barbed wire that now fracture their landscape. This dissonance repeats globally. The Maasai, whose traditional grazing routes once followed the seasonal movements of wildlife across East Africa, now find their ancestral lands bisected by the Kenya-Tanzania border, a line drawn in 1885 by European powers who cared more about access to Zanzibar's clove ports than the rhythms of nomadic life. Yet when Maasai warriors gather for the Unoto coming-of-age ceremony, the young men from both sides of the border still don identical red shukas and leap in the same rhythmic dances, their chants echoing across the artificial divide. The border might dictate their passports, but their culture remembers a different map. Language often betrays these hidden continuities along the U.S. Mexico frontier. The desert blooms with calx linguistic transplants where Spanish and English fuse into something new. A teenager in El Paso might say, "Vamos a lonchar," let's go to lunch, while her counterpart in Ciudad Juarez texts, "Te lomo patras," I'll call you back, both bending grammar to fit a shared reality the Rio Grande can't sever. These aren't errors, they're evidence of a cultural current that still flows beneath the rusted steel of border fences, tracing paths older than the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Even religions adapt while resisting division. The Buddhist temples of Luang Prabang in Laos and Chiang Mai in Thailand share nearly identical Sin tapestry designs on their altar cloths, despite the Mekong River marking a political boundary between them. The vibrancy of these textiles dyed with indigo traded along the same routes for 800 years, mocks the notion that faith could be contained by something as flimsy as a national border. Similarly, Sufi shrines dotting the India-Pakistan divide attract devotees from both sides, their Qawwali music spilling across the Wagah checkpoint like water finding cracks in a dam. The irony, many political borders now considered immutable were once fluid zones of exchange. The Benin-Nigeria boundary, for instance, follows 19th century British patrol routes meant to control palm oil trade, yet Edo-speaking communities on either side still stage the same masquerade festivals, their carved wooden masks depicting deities that predate colonial cartography. In the Balkans, the Drina River separates Bosnia from Serbia, but the epic poems sung in its valley still recount shared Ottoman-era heroes, their verses preserving a unity the Dayton Accords couldn't erase. What emerges is a quiet rebellion. Every time a Berber wedding party ignores the Algeria-Morocco border to reunite families separated by French colonial maps, or when Hmong refugees in Minnesota stitch Paj Endau story cloths identical to those made by cousins in Laos, they're proving something essential. Culture doesn't migrate, it remembers. Trade routes may fade into ghost roads, but the traditions they carried refuse to become ghosts. They linger in the steam rising from a shared teapot, in the lilt of a lullaby, in the stubborn persistence of memory over lines drawn in sand. A cargo ship glides through the Panama Canal, its hull stacked high with containers bound from Shanghai to New York, a journey that would have taken months by land now completed in weeks. This is the modern Silk Road, where steel hulls have replaced camel caravans and satellite tracking stands in for star navigation. But just as the old trade routes faded when better paths emerged, today's highways and railroads face their own existential question. In a world of drone deliveries and virtual marketplaces, which of our concrete arteries will become the ghost roads of the future? Consider the American interstate system, a marvel of mid-century engineering that reshaped commerce and culture. Yet as remote work shrinks commutes and electric trucks promise to reroute freight corridors, stretches of Route 66's successor, Interstate 40, already feel like relics. Towns that thrived on roadside diners and gas stations now watch traffic bypass them for more efficient distribution hubs. The same shift grips Europe, where high-speed rail lines between major cities leave secondary highways quieter each year, their rest stops echoing with the ghosts of long-haul truckers. But obsolescence isn't just about technology, it's about politics. The Belt and Road Initiative's new overland corridors through Central Asia could sideline ancient Silk Road cities that missed the infrastructure lottery, just as colonial ports once doomed inland trading hubs. Meanwhile, melting Arctic ice is sketching a startling new map. The Northern Sea route along Russia's coast could soon rival the Suez Canal, leaving Mediterranean ports like Piraeus and Alexandria scrambling to reinvent themselves just as Malacca did when Portuguese caravels outflanked the Silk Road. Yet history whispers a cautionary tale. The Roman roads that still underpin European highways prove that some routes refuse to fade. Digital trade may seem like the ultimate disruptor, but even data needs physical pathways. Server farms cluster near old trading centers for the same reasons medieval markets did: access to water, energy, and labor. Silicon Valley's fiber optic cables trace the same coastal corridors that once carried Spanish mission supplies, while Africa's new undersea internet cables land at ports built for the spice trade. Geography's logic is stubborn. The true legacy of tomorrow's ghost roads won't be measured in cracked asphalt or abandoned warehouses, but in the cultural DNA they leave behind. Just as the Silk Road gave us pasta and paper money, today's fading routes are seeding the future. Truck stops along America's Rust Belt highways birth TikTok food trends. Think Iowa sushi, pickle rolls, or Ohio onion burgers, while derelict European rail yards evolve into avant-garde art districts. The languages of commerce evolved too. English became the lingua franca of air traffic control because Britain dominated 19th century telegraph cables, proving that communication networks fossilize long after their infrastructure rusts. Perhaps the most enduring ghost roads will be the ones we can't see. Cryptocurrency mining follows the paths of cheap hydroelectric power, often in regions like Sichuan or Iceland, where waterfalls once powered mills along medieval trade routes. Even space exploration mimics old patterns. Lunar landing sites are chosen for the same flat terrain near resources logic that guided caravan stops in the go-by. The cycle continues, not in spite of globalization, but because of it. Every abandoned big box store along a diverted highway, every repurposed shipping container in a digital nomad hub, is a footnote in the same story. Trade routes don't disappear, they transform. The only question is what ghosts will leave for the next generation to uncover. History never truly erases its footsteps, it just shuffles them into new patterns. The ghost roads of the past whisper a crucial lesson. Borders are illusions of permanence in a world that never stops moving. Think of the shifting sands of the Sahara, where caravan routes that once carried gold and salt now mark the boundaries between modern nations. Or consider how the Danube River, once a bustling medieval trade highway, today stitches together 10 countries, its waters as much a political divide as a geographical one. These transformations didn't happen overnight, they unfolded over centuries, responding to the quiet pressures of commerce, conflict, and innovation. The rise and fall of trade routes reveal a fundamental truth: borders are negotiations between geography and power. When the Silk Road flourished, empires like Tang China and Abbasid Persia expanded their reach along its arteries, their frontiers stretching to protect lucrative trade. But when maritime routes eclipsed overland travel, those same borders contracted like drying ink, leaving cities like Samarkand stranded inland. Today, we see echoes of this dance in the Arctic, where melting ice is unlocking new shipping lanes and sparking fresh territorial disputes. Russia's recent claims to underwater continental shelves aren't just about oil reserves. They're about controlling the next generation of trade corridors, proving that history's playbook still guides modern geopolitics. Technology, too, redraws borders in ways that would baffle our ancestors. The internet, often called the digital Silk Road, ignores customs checkpoints and passport stamps, creating virtual territories where data flows like spices once did. Cryptocurrencies challenge national currencies just as Spanish silver pesos once disrupted local barter systems. Even climate change is rewriting the map. Thawing permafrost in Siberia is revealing ancient reindeer migration paths that could become new transit routes, while rising seas threaten to drown historic ports like Alexandria. Their once strategic locations now liabilities. Yet for all these shifts, some rules remain constant. Mountain passes and river valleys still dictate where infrastructure grows, just as they did for Roman engineers and Incan stonemasons. The Khyber Pass, a natural gateway through the Hindu Kush, remains as strategically vital today for NATO supply convoys as it was for Mughal invasion forces. The difference: instead of camels carrying silks, it's trucks hauling semiconductors. Geography's tyranny endures, only the cargo changes. So what does this mean for the future? Watch where the money moves. China's Belt and Road Initiative isn't just building highways, it's creating dependencies, ensuring that tomorrow's borders will bend toward its economic orbit. Meanwhile, Africa's new railway corridors, like the Kenya Standard Gauge, are resurrecting medieval Swahili trade networks in modern steel. The lesson is clear: today's infrastructure projects are tomorrow's political boundaries in waiting. The ghost roads teach us to see borders not as fixed lines, but as living processes, pulse points in the circulatory system of global exchange. They remind us that every customs post, every border fence, is just a temporary answer to an eternal question: who controls the flow? The sands will keep shifting. The only real map is the one we're all still drawing. The quiet power of ghost roads isn't locked in the past, it's etched into the present, shaping everything from geopolitical flashpoints to the price of your morning coffee. Take the simmering tensions between India and Pakistan. Their contested border in Kashmir doesn't just follow arbitrary colonial lines, it traces the ancient Grand Trunk Road, a trade artery that once funneled spices and silks between Central Asia and the Indian Ocean. Control this corridor today, and you control more than territory. You hold the keys to energy pipelines, water sources, and military access. The same rocks that sheltered Mughal merchants now provide cover for modern patrols, proving that geography's strategic value outlasts empires. Economies, too, dance to the rhythm of these vanished routes. The booming port cities of Dubai and Singapore owe their skyscrapers to the same logic that made Venice rich, positioning themselves at the choke points of global trade. Dubai's Jebel Ali port thrives precisely where ancient pearl divers once anchored, while Singapore's shipping lanes retrace the path of 9th century Chinese junks carrying porcelain to Persia. Even Wall Street's dominance as a financial hub stems from its location along the old American Indian trade networks that later became Erie Canal routes, ghost roads layered under asphalt and stock tickers. Cultural identities cling to these pathways with surprising tenacity. Along the Swahili coast, the fusion of Arabic, Indian, and African influences in architecture and cuisine didn't spring from thin air. It simmered for centuries in port cities like Zanzibar, where monsoon winds brought merchants and their traditions. Today, when a Kenyan chef layers coconut into a biryani or a Tanzanian bride wears henna patterns borrowed from Gujarat, they're not copying, they're continuing. These living heirlooms traveled on routes now buried under cruise ship docks, yet their essence endures in kitchen recipes and wedding songs. The most urgent lesson lies in predicting future borders. As climate change melts Arctic ice, new shipping lanes are emerging along routes once navigated only by Inuit kayaks, and nations are scrambling to claim them. Russia's aggressive planting of flags along the Northern Sea route isn't just about resources. It's about controlling what could become the 21st century's version of the Strait of Malacca. Meanwhile, drought in the Sahel is resurrecting forgotten Saharan trade oases as potential hubs for solar farms, their value suddenly recalculated by sun exposure rather than water access. Understanding ghost roads means seeing the invisible hand that still moves us. When trucks roll down Germany's autobahns, they're following the precise curves medieval carters used to avoid swamps. When diplomats argue over river rights in the Mekong Delta, they're reenacting negotiations first held by Khmer rice traders. The past isn't just prologue, it's the undercurrent shaping every border dispute, every trade deal, every cultural revival. These paths may fade from maps, but their imprint lingers like footsteps in wet concrete, hardening into the foundations of our world. From the winding trails of the Tea-Horse Road to the sun-baked tracks of the Trans-Saharan caravans, these ghost roads are more than just forgotten paths, they are the silent architects of our modern world. Every time you trace a border on a map or savor a dish infused with spices from distant lands, you're interacting with the legacy of routes that once pulsed with life. The past isn't buried beneath layers of time. It's woven into the fabric of our cities, our languages, even our daily routines. Think about the coffee in your cup, a drink that traveled from the highlands of Ethiopia to the cafes of Vienna along routes carved by Ottoman traders. Or consider the intricate patterns on a Turkish rug, echoing motifs that migrated from Central Asia to Anatolia on the backs of Silk Road camels. These connections aren't relics. They're living threads, tying us to the merchants, explorers, and storytellers who once walked these paths. The borders we take for granted, the cultural exchanges we celebrate, even the conflicts that shape headlines, they all bear the fingerprints of ghost roads. But here's the most remarkable part: these routes aren't finished shaping our world. As climate change reshapes landscapes and technology redraws trade networks, new ghost roads are being born. The Arctic's melting ice opens passages once navigable only by Viking longships, while fiber optic cables follow the same undersea trenches that guided clipper ships. The cycle continues, just as it did when Roman roads became medieval pilgrim trails, and when camel caravans gave way to container ships. So the next time you stumble upon an old stone bridge in the countryside, or notice a highway that curves mysteriously around a long-gone river ford, pause for a moment. You're standing on a ghost road, a place where history whispers and the echoes of countless footsteps still linger. If you've enjoyed unraveling these hidden stories with us, let us know in the comments which forgotten pathway should we explore next. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the past that never really left us. The road doesn't end here, it just leads to the next